by the Crimea policy of redistribution of the real estate or property, generally speaking. In Simferopol, I myself, on the rights of private ownership, I had a building in Simferopol, Pushkin Street 11A. I used to have my deputy's office. So one day, the so-called the State Council of Crimea declares that building the property of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea without any explanation, without any grounds, whatever. So the occupational authorities now have the ownership of this building. Now I have a copy of the contract. This building later was freely given to the director of Federal Security Service, so one of the officers of the FSB. So this kind of theft or capture became kind of it's a regulated phase, regulated by the Kremlin. Then this was kind of a test, and when they made sure or were convinced that there is no response or no reaction from the side of Ukrainian authorities, and they must say there is no policy which would give us the clear understanding what to do in such cases, and there is no policy aimed at protecting the interest of our citizens. And that's why such cases as the legal capture of property is being developed. You heard the examples of Chernomornefty gas, Lexion gas structure, and the whole structure in Crimea have been illegally captured. All the public enterprising companies in the, let's say, these public property facilities, but they were not satisfied only with that. They started to capture private enterprises and companies. For example, Reinforced Concrete Company, Crimea Железобетон. The majority of those who during the voucher privatization were given shares. But one day, this so-called State Council of the Crimea declares all the facilities of this enterprise the state property of the Republic of Crimea. And on the premises of those objects, they registered the public enterprise unitary under the occupationist law. And then these actually, let's say, stops to be the joint stock company. The same about the suing company was a joint stock company according to the voucher privatization, and it's a huge price, more than 9,000 square meters, and now it houses the occupation administration propaganda office and whatnot. So there are a lot of examples which can be cited here for each city in the Crimea. You know, even the first stage of redivision of property was accompanied by some tales and stories. There is a private bank which failed to return to the Crimea their deposits, and in order to recompensate those non-returned deposits, they decide to redistribute the property. So they say that the Ukrainian citizens can have a possibility to take their property. I understand that this is not easy thing to do, but Mr. Kushniruk actually doesn't do anything. What I gave you, the examples I cited here, they never were privatized and never serviced, let's say, so we cannot even tie that to virtual idea altogether. And the fact that today's stage of redistribution or the capturing of the property is supported by the Russian authorities, this can be testified by the fact how the courts respond to that. The illegally established courts by the Russian authorities, and which legally became part of the Russian judicial system, how those courts react to the lawsuits of the citizens regarding those specific issues. In no way they do that. They just react or respond to the telephone calls of the powers that be in the Crimea. Many people inform me that they became the victims when their private property was captured or taken away from them. I emphasize private property, and actually to find any grounds to do that is impossible. So those people take this case to the court. The courts even do not register their lawsuits. If they do that, they will just they put it in a long drawer, so to say, under the again they never become the subject to court hearing in the Russian court or judicial system. Now we are living through the stage, or in the beginning of the new stage, of redistribution of the property, which is related to land. Because, first of all, the legislation of the occupationist state doesn't fit the Ukrainian legislation, it doesn't match it, because the occupation forces try to apply their own legislation on the occupied territory without not taking into consideration the previous history. And there is another mass scale wave of illegal actions. In conclusion, I would like to once again emphasize that, to much regret, the Ukraine today has not, let's say, outlined the strategy regarding to the occupied territory. It did not implement any systematic technologies to protect the interests of the state of Ukraine, of the public enterprises, the private businesses, and each and every citizens who suffered as a result of the Russian occupation of those territories. Thank you. Thank you, Andriy. Now they turn the mic to Yulia Kazdobina, analyst of the Ukrainian Center for Independent Political Studies. I would like to add a few words to what has been said already. There was a kind of study research was going on with the private and public property in the Crimea within the framework of the project protection and efficiency of the political and citizen rights of the citizens living in the Crimea. So far, this report hasn't been presented, and that's why I'm going to say just a few words about that, how nationalization in the Crimea took place, and as they mentioned already, this happened, this took place in several waves. The first one took place in March 2014 when they passed the resolution called the State or Public Council of the Independent Republic of Crimea, according to which any property which is in the social, public or private property ownership is become a property of Crimea under the law which are enforced on the Crimean Peninsula. And this resolution, actually, according to this resolution, they adopted several supplements dated March 26, which include 131 facilities. Then in September, another 3 projects were included there. In the latest resolution was adopted on February 27 this year. The Crimean authorities declared that they were going to stop the nationalization from their own, because that was kind of transition period from Ukraine to the Crimea, and after that they were very much interested in attracting the investments, so they decided to stop nationalization process, and they were going to respect the private property in the Crimea from there on. There were several attempts to, let's say, to disagree with the decisions on the part of the owners of the private property, but so far, just a second. Nationalization of the Berezovets complex, which belonged previously to the businessman Teruta, they applied to the Court of Arbitration in the city of Moscow, but their lawsuit was cancelled because they had to to send this or register this suit at the place of registration of that property. And there is no decision passed or judicial judgment passed on the second case as well. I would like to say that this nationalization takes place without the paying of the respective compensation, which had to be paid out according even to the Russian legislation in force. However, these two can raise the issue how Ukraine can actually was the agreement and safeguard its rights. Because some of the lawyers say that if Ukraine demands compensation, can receive this compensation, but after having received this compensation, it will lose its right to that property. So Ukraine had to demand not compensation for the property per se, but for the profit, of missed profit, as a result of, let's say, didn't have a chance to use that property for this period of time. Another comment, Ukraine already put a stake to sue the Crimean authorities' actions in the international courts. In this decision, with the framework of international law, which today Russia ignores completely. And at the same time, we have to take into consideration that the international law drastically differs from the, let's say, domestic legislation, because at the international level, there is almost no mechanism which could be used in order to force the violator country to follow the judicial decision or judgments. An example, the court judgment regarding the Human Rights Court, I mean. There are a lot of resolutions, court resolutions, according to which Russia had to apply certain measures, but Russia ignores those resolutions. In the example, last year they passed a decision by the International Court under which Russia had to pay certain compensation to the UCAS owners, but according to the news for this year, the funds have not been provided for the budget of Russian Federation to pay this compensation. So Ukraine embarked upon the more civilized road to not agree with this decision and to consider or to recognize Russia as an aggressive country, and based on that provision to demand compensation from Russia. But in my view, the civilized way is rather a long time one, and hardly we can believe that we force Russia to fulfill this court decision. If you're talking about the situation now that all these, given all the importance that we have to demand punishment to be applied to Russia, we have to pay attention to the following tendency or trend. There are some sanctions imposed upon the Russian Federation. Many investors who maybe would like to invest money into the Crimea, but Crimea is specifically the territory which investors are banned to invest their money. So we should pay more attention to those investors who seek the chances to invest their money to make Ukraine attractive to those investors.
And it does not look possible to seek any compensation from the Russian Federation in the nearest future, but at least it might be possible to compensate for these losses through attracting investors in the Ukrainian economy. Thank you, Julia. Actually, we are going to know the opinion of our next guest, renowned economic expert Taras Zahorodnyi, who's the managing partner of the National Anti-Crisis Group. In the last comment, there was opinion voiced that it is not advisable to apply to international courts. But on the other hand, do you remember the example of the Noga company that filed a suit against Russia and was successful? The thing is that it was a private company, and it was about private company and the debt of the state to that company, and they did manage to succeed with their lawsuit. As regards the Crimea and prospects of it, unfortunately, the crimes we speak about, they will only increase in time in terms of the numbers, and we should pragmatically understand what system of coordinates we operate in. After they failed to occupy the 6 oblasts of Ukraine, surely they did understand in Russia that the Crimea project will be only successful with Mykolaiv, Kherson, Odessa, and other oblasts occupied by Russia. Having not succeeded in that, Russia has switched now to Plan B, that is profiteering from destruction. And unfortunately, we need to say goodbye to these enterprises remaining there. Most probably, they will be dismantled and used as scrap metal, like they do it now in the east of Ukraine. Then Russia will do whatever it can to destroy the existing infrastructure. They are currently actively destroying the civil infrastructure in the Crimea because of lots of military equipment being transported there. And Russia traditionally says that they're short on people and they're short on money, and that way they will do the way they did it at Stalin time, when they will try to make life impossible in one area to make people move to other areas where these people are needed the most. This is exactly the Siberian region. Many of the plants built at the Soviet time, they were built in view of Russian specialists to be stationed there, beginning from Yuzhmash to military enterprises. And same will be implemented in the Crimea, when the Crimeans will be squeezed out of their peninsula elsewhere. There are numerous ads advertising job opportunities elsewhere in Russia being posted in the Crimea. And we should understand and recognize that by the time we will eventually have the Crimea back, it will be completely destroyed. So do you know that Russia did not invest in the Kaliningrad area for 30 years, fearing that it won't last for long? And only in 70s, when the Helsinki Agreement was signed, Russia was assured, and the Soviet power was assured, that it might be feasible to invest there. So in terms of local elites having to somehow survive in absence of government investments, I think they will be trying their best to do whatever they can, but it will be about ultimately dismantling the local property and infrastructure. And I do agree with Andriy here that we have no, unfortunately, policy to calculate and compute losses. And it is only possible to tell to Russia that we are trying to calculate losses, and the expected range of losses will be that and that, and we want you to think in advance of how you're going to repay this debt. This is kind of a soft pressure in Russia to make all the economic entities there in Russia mindful that any structure willing to invest there will have some hard time later on. Russian elites are globalized, they are everywhere in Europe, in the United States, and it is not really a problem to find pieces of capital and equity of big Russian companies elsewhere. Say Gazprom has a share in BASF, Germany, and if you hit against Gazprom, you can easily track the equity in this company, for example. So the Ukrainians need to understand that they have to be more pragmatic, the way that it is done everywhere in the world. This is a fight for resources, natural resources, human resources, etc. And Russia does its part in this fight in the most barbaric way, probably because they don't know how to do it otherwise. So when in Rome, do what the Romans do. And probably we should think about hiring some New York law firms, offering them proper payment for their work. And if you would suggest some percentage from the, say, 10% from the claim amount, they will do anything they're capable of to win the cases. Surely we don't have professionals at this time in Ukraine. We have no influence on international courts, and we do not know at times even how to prepare these things for court proceedings. Surely if, say, Kolomoisky would want it, he would be well able to do it because he does have resources. He lost his Privatbank business in the Crimea, but other business persons in Ukraine, I'm not sure they will have this capacity. And anyway, I think that Ukrainian oligarchs will be very careful in judging their possibilities of looking for damage compensation. Anyway, we have good oligarchs who are ready to probably to negotiate, to reconciliate, and there are certain weak points seen on behalf of the state. But anyway, we should be pragmatic here. If we go back to the example of Noga company, so from the moment they filed their claim in about 92, 95, so it took them about 5 years to do it, but they were well able to play on the nerves of the Russian Federation before that, even before that. And I think that, in a nutshell, they had sort of reconciliation agreement reached. But anyway, they succeeded. And I think that these nationalization attempts can be fruitful for Ukraine only in case of waging this, if you want, soft blackmail against the Russian government. So the total amount of claims in the Crimea was in amount of $4 billion. And now I'd like to give the floor to another of our guests, Olesya Yakhno. She's a political scientist, and she has an advantage of the freedom of communication with many of her colleagues in the Russian Federation. I'd like to ask her, is it feasible to look into this claim procedure that we have heard? Good afternoon. First of all, I'd like to say that the Crimea and the Donbass affair has been a strategic mistake for Russia. In the time frame before 2005, 2010, some earlier attempts of thinking about that were palpably clear in Russia. And if Russia would consciously face the challenges it had that time and make some lessons, learns from some lessons, then it would be much harder for Ukraine to survive in these conditions. But rather than doing that, the Russian Federation, its government, suddenly decided to switch for the easiest part by going to the Crimea and Donbass. In absence of resources, in absence of elites related to the West, in absence of many other features, it was a weak move for Russia. As regards the Crimea, I think there are 3 weak points that Ukraine should also play on. First of all, it is about the legal nature of these nationalization efforts in the Crimea and this redistribution waged in the business environment. There are certain economic interests to be pursued. Then we have human rights violations. And thirdly, a quick militarization of the Crimea. The last point will be most frightening for the international community, for the West, but the first 2 points are exactly where Ukraine should make lots of efforts to to make at least some basic necessary legal step in this direction. About a month ago, there was a news about some big Ukrainian oligarchs eyeing the possibility of applying to international courts regarding their properties in the Crimea. It was about Kolomoisky, Akhmetov, in the last case about Ukrtelecom property. So I think that most probably they will be able to fight for their properties if they decide so, because there are certain weak points, obvious points in the politics of Russia there. But as regards the Ukrainian national policy, it might be necessary to look into those economic crimes that that involve Crimean citizens who cannot defend themselves on their own. And quoting from the Yukos case mentioned here, I can remind you that there will be penalties imposed in Russia if it does not pay the damages. And the final measure might be requisition of property of Russian Federation in the event of this stubborn refusal from settling the claim. So there are certain specific procedures regarding property rights protection. And if Ukraine will ever think about fighting for its property there, I would say that there are certain possibilities of being successful here. And surely this is a process that will take time. Given the processes currently unfolding in the Crimea, particularly those related to quick militarization of the peninsula, it surely provides certain specifics. But again, property compensations might be looked upon as kind of material compensation. The key position of the West regarding Russia is about economic pressure to be exerted. And in this regard, economic claims or property-related claims do have certain perspective. Taras has mentioned some Russian positions regarding the Crimea and the Ukrainian position. And really, there is a strong sentiment in favor of nationalization all over the country, but Russian experts could not really say what are the reasons for Russia to nationalize properties in the Crimea. Thank you, Olesya. Now we have time for just one or two questions because there is another yet briefing coming up. So if any questions, please.
I understand there are no questions. Okay, so we have the next briefing in few minutes.